frequencies. It would be, is, and was as if the universe was singing to her. Not only this one, in all variations, quintillions of polyphonic harmonies from one chord. Hertz this side, beyond and all around perception. Away from it, a new cosmos opened up. Planets, moons, and suns in constellations of spirals, not in the black of the universe, but in the greyish-pearl vacuum of the pneumosphere. Constellations of black holes, reddish and orange nebulae. Suddenly, everything contracted, was compressed to a point, and macrocosm became microcosm. In it, the cosmos was reflected from the outside. She was a component of it, while she carried it in its entirety within her. Her own planets, moons, suns. Their mutual reflection was continued in infinity. KLEIO fluctuated between quantum level and scales beyond any measurement. Contradictions merged and became the same. The impressions overwhelmed her. No human was created to experience these things in such a way. Again, she wanted to crouch. With a body that wasn't there, wanted to close eyes that weren't there. Except for her mind, she had completely dematerialized. She felt how she shrank to microscopic size before expanding into astronomical vastness, without mass, but with enormous gravity. As if the change replaced her breathing, she was about to lose her mind, the last thing of her that still remained. Only, when it disappeared in space, she remembered the words of the big Friedrich.
If you should lose yourself, concentrate on things you know.
It was these words that gave her being a last hold. It was her hearing, which was not there, that brought her back into existence. Suddenly, she heard a melody, both familiar and unfamiliar. A male voice that gave the music its character. Gradually the song took shape like an approaching echo. More and more clearly she heard. The 80s sound prevailed, as it was played on the radio in the 80s of countless worlds, by a band without a name, a song without a title. In most worlds. But no, wait, not in this world. Here it was by a band called KLEIO.EXE, and the title was Subways of Your Mind. How strange. As if she was listening from somewhere else before. KLEIO gained some composure as the verse transitioned into the chorus. And she returned from chaos to the fleeting state of order. If at the zenith of absurdities there was such a thing as order, she tried to preserve it mentally, thinking of things she knew. All at once, she noticed that a new body was forming around her mind. Unsure if it was hers or another satire of madness, she watched as the infinite of the pneumosphere transformed and took on a deeply familiar shape. All of a sudden, she stood in the middle of her childhood home in the small town of Fontainebleau, just an hour's drive from Paris away. Not a single piece of her father's art was still standing around. They reminded her mother of him. KLEIO's breath was caught when she suddenly saw her sitting there, an aged and somewhat lighter likeness of her, on the musty brown leather sofa, whose smell immediately evoked memories of the past. KLEIO perceived it, while she herself was not registered, as if she were a ghost, as if her daughter was only mentally present, which she missed in their phone call. Melancholy, she looked at old family photos, reveling in thoughts of a better time. They met the present, and highlighted the painful loss. A sob escaped her at the sight of the once happy family. Behind, her daughter imitated the emotional outburst like a child, mimicking the behavior of its parents. In the photo, Her youngest version was sitting well-fed and snuggled close to her, while the two almost formed a heart around their delight. A blonde chubby lay on his lap, looking wide-eyed and with a sugar-sweet snoot into the camera. Impossibly, KLEIO could remember how this snapshot was taken, but strangely enough, that day seemed most present to her. It was as if she could retrieve the file in the hard drive of her subconscious. Just as she was mentally accessing it, the photo vibrated in her mother's hand, tentatively, as if from the trembling of her wrist, highlighted as if by a double click of Windows. In fact, a window opened inside it, in a frame of celluloid, through time back to that moment when the snapshot was taken. And she ended where she was just beginning to be. Her parents were hosting one of their soirees, an evening party among their friends. There was drinking, talking, and eating, and they passed the time together playing games à la charades and Trivial Pursuit. At that time, her father's works of art were everywhere, in the living room next to the brown leather sofa, which was yet to absorb the smell of memories. To date, KLEIO may have been a passive participant. Like any toddler, she absorbed impressions like a sponge, was saturated with the essence of her surroundings. Suddenly, her adult consciousness was inside the body of a 2-year-old. She did not know the names of the people present, who gathered around her mother in the living room, laughing, drinking, and talking, helping themselves to the appetizers on the table. KLEIO wanted to communicate with them, to ask where her father was. So far, she had not been able to see him. She could not utter a single intelligible sentence. Her speech center was simply not developed far enough. Several listened to her, enraptured by how cute the babble sounded. Some reciprocated with well-intentioned strokes on her head and chubby cheeks.
That leads nowhere,
She realized with the insight of an adult. If she wanted to go to her father, she would have to come up with something else. Something she was capable of in her current state. And the solution came instinctively over her pouty lips.
Papa,
She said querulously. At the first attempt, no one registered her wish. Therefore, she repeated herself already more impatiently.
Papa.
Marie,
One of the guests spoke to her mother, guessing quite correctly.
I think KLEIO would like to go out to Vincent.
Oh, KLEIO.
Her mother said, in a tone usually used to address a toddler. She was one, after all. And yet KLEIO felt patronized.
He'll be there any moment.
I want to, Papa.
She got out stubbornly and watched her mother's eyes roll.
I can take her out quickly if you don't mind.
Replied one of the unnamed guests, who just become highly sympathetic, and she thanked him with a smile.
Wanted to check on the meat, anyway.
Without awaiting her mother's permission, he took Cleo by the hand and led her down the hallway and to a sliding glass door out into the garden behind the house. The short distance seemed like an eternity, and her little heart pounded faster and faster. When they crossed the threshold into the garden, it skipped a beat. When she saw him from behind at the stone grill, the self-proclaimed master of the ritual barbecue,
Smells promising.
her companion commented, making his presence known.
Were you going to build a beef out of meat, Nick?
Replied Vincent Vignier jokingly, and the very sound of his voice made tears of happiness well up inside her.
Who's going to eat all that, please?
Better too much than too little.
The no longer nameless Nick slipped in one of his nuggets of wisdom.
Your little girl wanted to make sure you were doing everything right, too. And she looks pretty hungry.
Her father turned to them from the grill, and seeing him filled her with a euphoria, which the toddler expressed with a jolly squeal.
She's always hungry,
he said with a grin, more to her than to his mate Nick. One somehow heard that it filled him with pride.
and thirsty. I'm worried she's going to develop the same drinking problem as me one day.
Obviously, he liked to joke. She knew. He drank only in the evenings, and even then, responsibly, with exceptions, since he was the sort of artist whose creativity dried up under the influence. In this respect, she had rather inherited her mother's pathos.
Does that mean you don't want any more beer?
Inquired Nick. Papa Vignier's look suggested that another one was against no principles. Nick returned to the house to get, as he said,
Fermented barley juice.
and he waved at Cleo with a smile, which she completely disregarded, now that she finally had her father to herself. Soon a year had passed for her since his death, and for him, it would be barely 20 more before he left. On unsteady legs, little Cleo marched toward him. She could not remember when walking had ever felt so hard, even in delirium. Just before she reached him, she lost her balance and was about to fall. But in his foresight, he had expected something like this, caught her and lifted her up in his arms.
You've become heavy. I won't be able to do this for long.
Perhaps her adult consciousness was making her heavier. Unlike her mother, he had always addressed her as a full human being. With all her strength, she clung to him, pressed her head to his chest and began to cry.
What's the matter, dear? There will be food soon,
he said, laughing. She would have liked to tell him everything, but she simply couldn't put it into words yet. Besides, their togetherness was disturbed when Nick returned with the beers and handed him one.
Papa, water.
Cleo spoke, and the two friends were amused.
Your daughter has your sense of humor.
She certainly has,
he confirmed proudly, looking her way. She pondered how Nick could be driven away. Her experience of how these things behaved might still have been slight, but gave rise to the fear that the opportunity to see him might go as quickly as it had arisen. Or was she now trapped in the body of a baby? She pushed that frightening thought away for the moment. After all, very few people got the chance to make up for a missed goodbye. Immediately, it was as if her father could read her thoughts, or anyone could, even decide what people were thinking.
Nick, can you maybe leave us alone for a minute?
He smiled, and respected that wish, was smiling at little Cleo in particular.
Sure. But don't you dare burn the good meat.
He pointed to his Ami, and joined the rest in the house.
You're really getting too heavy for me, kid.
Gently, he set her down on the floor. And only then did Cleo realize that since she and Nick had wanted to go out to see her father, nothing in her past had happened like this. Without being able to say where that certainty came from or how it was possible, all of a sudden, and again by an impulse of her thoughts, fell the next veil of reality. The phenomenal apocalypse of a paradoxical utopia. Startled, her father staggered backward, as if the devil himself appeared before him. He tripped over a concrete umbrella stand, fell ungently to the ground.
Papa, are you all right?
Asked Cleo in dismay, realizing far more dismayed that she had abruptly grown up.
Who are you? Where is my daughter?
He stammered in boundless confusion. There, where he had set his child down, there suddenly stood a young woman who was 20 years too old to be his daughter.
Take it easy.
She tried to calm him down, without any idea where to begin to explain what she herself didn't understand.
It's me, Papa. Cleo.
In his face, panic mixed with uncomprehending disbelief that this woman, who was at most 15 years younger than him, could be his 2-year-old daughter. For him, it did not just mathematically not add up. He got to his feet in a daze, panic turning into uncomprehending rage.
Where is she? What have you done with her? Tell me right now.
I can't tell you where my younger self is now.
She admitted.
Only that I somehow traveled back through time. And I am now here. With you.
His incomprehension remained, though the seriousness of his anger faded. He faced the choice of either believing her or to believe that a strange woman spontaneously manifested herself before him, where before his little daughter stood. A deep look into her eyes revealed something familiar.
Cleo?
He recognized her in a way that transcended the ocean of time, an ocean as it was reflected in her eyes.
How? How is this possible?
I don't know.
She admitted, relieved that he was considering the unbelievable.
I understand nothing of what is happening to me. But I am infinitely grateful for the chance to talk to you.
She began to sob, and somehow he would have liked to comfort her, but maintained the distance, as this was beyond even his vivid imagination. Besides, he heard the sadness in her voice, which was obviously for him.
Then I won't see how you grow up?
He wanted to know.
Yes, you do,
She replied, sniffling.
It was last year. Cancer. Everything happened so fast. I should have visited you more, but I was just thinking about me and my problems. Our last conversation.
Remorse left her in a trickle of tears.
I should have heard you weren't well, and I often wondered afterward if I was purposely overhearing. I practically stifled you, and that was the last time I could talk to you. You fell asleep 2 days after, and never woke up.
It must have seemed incomprehensible in his situation. But Vincent Vignier was one of those people to whom even the most unthinkable things could become thinkable under the right circumstances. He had to sit down. The shock was deep in his bones. After all, his daughter from the future had just told him how his life would end after he had seen his little one become her. And even though he took it better than most would have in that situation, he disgorged a mixture of hors d'oeuvres and beer into the grassy area behind the barbecue.
The reaction is normal when you're confronted with these things. I felt the same way.
She tried to cheer him up, which helped a little.
The most absurd thing about it is that I believe you,
he reluctantly realized, looking determinedly at her.
KLEIO.EXE. I will do everything I can to get to know you as you are.
As someone who grew up under two egocentrics, Cleo needed time to overcome the inclination that she was not the center of the universe, and at the same time was the center of her own. But Cleo had forgotten how much her parents adored her and how she was their son. She wondered whether the course of history could be changed with this. Treacherous thoughts crept in and developed a world of their own. She felt that she did not have long, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I have to go,
She said, without knowing why. Tears welled up, and she rushed towards him for a hug. He didn't stop her, welcoming her and squeezing her tenderly, although it felt strange to hug another woman who looked so much like his sweetheart. It came close to the goodbye they missed in the future.
I love you, Papa.
She still brought out, hearing him.
I love you too.
And Vincent Vignier disappeared from her life once again. The particles of her environment were absorbed as if by a vacuum cleaner. Matter disintegrated into its pixels and disappeared in the suction of a spiral.
No, not again. Not this time.
She said aloud to herself, striving to direct her thoughts back to something familiar that would lead her back to him. Only she couldn't. She tried too hard, trying to force it, and chaos took over. Around her, the pneumosphere kicked into high gear. Thoughts rushed by like starlight at warp speed. Some of them lingered.
It's funny how the colors of the real world only seem real when you video them on a screen.
Came in a strange voice. Or was it hers? Was it hers? And wasn't that from a clockwork orange? There were voices and thoughts. Voices like echoes of thoughts. Hers and others. Until someone actually spoke to her from beyond. The way it had happened in the spree park or at the cinema, only in countless variations, seemingly all the ways at the same time, beyond space and time. Time itself seemed to bother her. People bothered her with the time. "Do you have the time?" someone asked, as if she was personally in charge. But she didn't have the time, of course not. She didn't think she had it. She certainly didn't have it this morning.
Did I leave it somewhere?
No, surely not. She used a little of it like everyone else, but she didn't have it. At least, she didn't think she had. Possibly the Navy had it. In Washington, right? They kept it in an observatory. That's how it was. They let out a little each day. Not too much. They didn't want to give her too much time. Just enough. Time? She didn't have. Not in the sense that she had too little of it. But there was no time. When the hell was it? We made it up. Time was a human invention. There were no numbers in the sky. She looked. They weren't there. When were we? We thought we knew where we were. But we never really knew when we were. When the hell are we? There is a moment. It's not here yet. It's on the way, in the future. There it comes. There it is. Ah, shit. It is gone. There is no now. 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 Everything is the near future or recent past. Welcome to the present. Oh, gone again.
Time is an illusion.
Seemingly out of thoughts, arose before her a spiral. Vibrating, pulsating shapes, squares, triangles, circles, platonic solids in 3 and 4 dimensions, even more incomprehensible. Thus, all sides stood inside and outside, facing each other simultaneously, intertwined in membranes. Fractal nets were superimposed, layering matter in a fine tuning of universal harmony. They reminded KLEIO of harp strings, creating a melody with their own vibration. For the first time, she heard the symphony the cosmos was playing for her. The impressions formed a whirlpool in front of her. A light suction arose around her. Too much she did not have to resist to withstand it. Her dress and hair fluttered towards it when she took a look inside. It looked like how she imagined a black hole, a spherical rift in space and time, but instead of black, the supernatural glow blinded her. Distorted rays of light in white, magenta, and purple. In the face of the natural wonder that presented itself before her, KLEIO missed how suddenly a whole herd of bizarre creatures crept up behind her. Just as she touched the ethereal form of one, and the coldness of it radiated into her fingers, she noticed their presence and shrank back. Even more so when she turned to face them. A flying, intricately entwined swarm of hundreds of these creatures headed straight for the opening, and thus her. They most closely resembled worms, but they were practically transparent, and could only be recognized by the light that refracted around them. They seemed to sing, which reminded KLEIO of whale song, were not solid, more gel-like, shiny wisps of smoke or steaming glass noodles. They crawled, flew, hovered and swam through the weightlessness, lured by the opening, or rather driven there, as KLEIO immediately discovered. Behind the herd followed a group of other beings, remotely humanoid, but no less strange. At first, KLEIO made out only their outlines, and had the impression that they were indeed human beings, or at least beings like Friedrich, who chose a human appearance. They held themselves on long walking sticks. Immediately after, she realized that remotely humanoid was a generous definition of what one wanted to consider human-like. They walked backwards, or rather with their backs forward, and their skin was green, in blue tunics with hoods that reached over their heads and might as well have been skin flaps. KLEIO did not see the faces of these outlandish shepherds until the one in front passed her. It consisted of a huge eyeball. He did not blink in a familiar way. His horizontal slit pupil contracted outward. The creature seemed to look at KLEIO as irritated as the other way around, as if such creatures rarely came under its eye, although it was hard to tell with a glower that couldn't help but look surprised. The creature lost interest in her, and went back to its tasks, which obviously consisted of keeping the herd of these ether worms together.
They choose the path of least resistance, searching for dark matter.
The thoughts did not originate from her. She acted as the receiver. As if rooted to the spot, she watched as the herd and its shepherds disappeared in the whirlpool. With their entry into the portal, the maelstrom increased. The longer, the more KLEIO had to fight against it. She wanted to hold on to something, but the ground was too slippery.
I have to imagine something concrete.
Came to her like a eureka. Spasmodically, she thought of how an anchored pole or something similar arose in front of her, frowned in mental effort, and felt really stupid because nothing happened at all. Until the force of attraction overwhelmed her, and she lost her grip. Stay tuned for weekly chapters. Like, share, and subscribe for more wacky adventures. We thank you for your support.